Long before Victor opened the Maharaja, before Jasper discovered a labyrinth, before Nellie G became a fashion icon, and Annabelle became the spark of the resistance, vampires crawled along the streets, hills, and valleys of Los Angeles. Hello, and welcome back to Masquerade Monday. Last time we talked about the glorious revolution of L.A., and in this part we will talk about the forming of the Free States, so if you missed the third part, you can watch that here. At the start of 1945, the Anarch Free States stretched from the Mexican border to San Jose and from the Pacific Ocean to the Nevada state line, but the leaders of the revolt had little time for celebration. Los Angeles, suddenly deprived of the force that had controlled it all these years, fell into chaos. The city government put in place by Don Sebastian had no direction, and no one among the anarchs felt competent to take up the reins. The Revolutionary Council, as the leaders of the revolt came to be called, had an even bigger worry. How would the Camarilla react? Would it send in the Justicars and Archons to re-establish its hegemony? The council did its best to prepare for such an attack, but knew that its efforts would be insufficient to halt a serious Camarilla effort to force Los Angeles back into the fold by force. To their surprise, such an attack never occurred. To understand the reaction of the Camarilla to the revolt, one must understand the psychological impact of the events of that night. The Camarilla is based on the idea that elders not only know better than their childer, but also have the power to enforce their will upon them. Up until the revolt, most kindred, elder, and neonate alike believed that the Camarilla was eternal. The kindred might disagree about whether the Camarilla was ultimately desirable, but all agreed that nothing could break the power that the elders wielded over the younger vampires. The revolt changed all of that. Suddenly, the elders realized that their long-boasted power could not always control an angry mob of lesser kindred. They became aware, many for the first time, that they could die in spite of everything, and this had a chilling effect. If their domination of the younger vampires was not absolute, how could princes maintain order? How could the Camarilla or even the Masquerade be maintained? The elders faced a bitter choice. They could make an example of Los Angeles, or they could tend to their own problems and lick their wounds. The debate raged for months until the meeting of the Camarilla Inner Circle in June 1945, held in the ruins of a recently liberated Venice. No one has confirmed exactly what happened at this meeting, but the Anarchs say it went something like this. The Tremere and the Nosferatu proposed that the Camarilla march into Los Angeles and lay waste to it. Ventru-Toreador and Malkavian representatives all recommended that the princes spend their efforts on ensuring the stability of the Camarilla in other cities of the world. The Bruja and Gangrel both suggested that the Camarilla leave Los Angeles alone to pursue its own destiny. The Inner Circle finally announced that the princes should crack down on any sign of anarch activity in their cities, and all Justicars made it their first priority to root out and destroy instigators of the anarch movement. They also decided to place agents inside of Los Angeles to watch and wait for the revolt to collapse on its own, all the while heatedly denying claims that they were afraid to fight the anarchs, or that their masters had been involved in the uprising. Whatever the true reason, Los Angeles got a much-needed breathing space. But even without the threat of Camarilla retaliation, Los Angeles was still in chaos. Many of the anarchs did not fully understand what it was they had fought for, and looked to Jeremy McNeil or Salvador to take over the role of prince, the farthest thing from either of their minds. Therefore, the Revolutionary Council met and produced the document called the Status Perfectus, or Perfect State. In it, they laid out the rules by which the Free States were not to be governed, but were to govern themselves. And it goes like this. We, the kindred of the Free State, do hereby declare that we and our progeny and all kindred who choose freedom over oppression and liberty over tyranny of all clans and generations have as an inherent part of their being the spiritual substance called libertas, or free will. We further declare that, as we have freed ourselves from the bonds of mortality, so must we free ourselves from the forces that would rob us of our libertas. Not only must we continue to struggle on our own behalf, but on behalf of our brothers and sisters who continue to be robbed of their libertas by oppression, ignorance, and fear. The Anarch Free State is the political expression of that struggle. In choosing to free ourselves from political tyranny, we have also chosen to embrace our own libertas, and that of our brother and sister kindred everywhere. For these reasons, we, the kindred of the Anarch Free State, meeting this night in solemn convocation, do hereby pledge ourselves to the following principles. We declare ourselves to be free and independent, owing allegiance to no creature and no organization. We declare our ability to rule ourselves with no prince, no primogen, and no other ruler other than that we choose for ourselves. We declare our kinship with oppressed kindred everywhere and offer a home to all kindred of all generations and clans who will agree to dwell in harmony with us. We further accept our responsibility to our oppressed brothers and sisters everywhere and pledge to assist them at all times and in all places in their own struggle for the freedom that we declare to be the birthright of all kindred from now until the end of time. We recognize our responsibility to maintain the Masquerade and we pledge to protect and defend it. We establish this status perfectus and recognize its duty to all kindred. The status perfectus was a blueprint for a way of unlife previously unknown to kindred. The document quickly circulated among Anarch communities and has continued to serve as a goal for Anarch struggles everywhere. Aware that there would still be a tendency to look to the Revolutionary Council for answers to all of LA's problems, that body dissolved itself on the publication of the status, leaving Los Angeles with no nominal leadership at all. This resulted in a wild free-for-all in which individual vampires staked out huge territories for themselves and forbade other kindred to hunt in them. As time went by, it became clear that the only way to safely claim a hunting ground was to form a coterie of trusted kindred, and then claim the area for the group. The area had to be large enough to support the coterie, yet remain small enough to be defended. These coteries soon became the dominant political model in the Free States. As soon as the Anarch Free States came into existence, even more kindred of all kinds poured into Southern California. While most were from various clans, many were caitiff, looking for a place to belong and something to believe in. The founders of the Free States hoped these freedom seekers would discover a society of vampires living harmoniously together. Instead, they found an increasingly overpopulated urban area, mainly controlled by coteries that did not want newcomers invading on their turf. As competition for the available kine heated up, clashes between the coteries increased in frequency and intensity. Finally, in 1956, Jeremy McNeil felt forced to step in and call a meeting. Under his guarantee of safety, the leaders of these coteries came together and drew up a map of LA to designate the boundaries of each coterie's hunting grounds, which became known as baronies, and Los Angeles was carved up like a medieval kingdom. This agreement did not entirely eliminate the fighting, but it created some amount of stability. But there was an enemy in the city the Anarchs seemed to have forgotten. Sabbat agents had infiltrated Los Angeles long before the revolt, and their reports of Don Sebastian's overthrow thrilled the sect. The Anarchs had just brought down one of the strongest cities in the Camarilla, and now it would be child's play to bring in the war parties and lead the City of Angels to the glory of the Sabbat way. The Sabbat waited and prepared for a siege while reports piled in that the city had no internal structure in place to defend itself, and that the gangs of coteries hated each other too much to combine forces to resist a takeover. And so in 1965, it took very little Sabbat effort to fan the flames to the point of explosion, and explode it did. At first, events went perfectly. The suddenness and viciousness of the attack had indeed stunned LA's Anarchs into diving for cover. Gradually, however, morale began to improve. The Anarchs felt a call, as though from the heart of the city, rallying them to the defense of the freedom they had fought so hard to win. And quietly, like shadows at dusk, the Anarchs began to gather. As the third night of the siege fell, suddenly huge groups of snarling kindred poured out of the Hollywood Hills. Led by Salvador, McNeil, and McNeil's two-handed greatsword, the Anarchs carried the attack back to the warriors of the Sabbat. The fighting was more intense than that of the revolt, and as the battle raged, remnants of the Camarilla began to gather, hovering around the edge of the battle, perhaps hoping these two sects would take each other out. Eventually, the Sabbat retreated with promises to return someday, their voices drowned out by the ragged cheer of the defenders. Even more amazing, the Camarilla did not move against the Anarchs. Jeremy McNeil hoped that the horror of the attack would bring the vampires of LA together, but it was not to be. And almost as soon as the Sabbat left, the bickering started again, and things in LA went back to normal. In the next video, we'll discuss Los Angeles in the late 90s, where a series of events would shape the world we see in both Bloodlines and LA by Night. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching.